if you accept all that, right, and you accept that you can do all that and still get all the fruits that they bring, and you just accept the fact that those fruits just come, like I'm saying, by osmosis or some deterministic deterministic way, right? So you're stumbling deterministically into progress and everything will always be okay, then we're going to be doomed. Because that's not how it works. I've been down this road before, but now What's going on, people? Welcome to Big Fo Nation. I'm Big Fo. And if you've been here before, you know exactly what's about to happen. Anybody that publishes anything on YouTube that comes across my desk as a bad idea, they get hit with the Philosopher's Toolkit. It looks a little something like this. Now, on the chopping block today is Scott Adams. Now, Scott Adams, unlike Thomas Sowell, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, is a self-professed or self-proclaimed Master Persuader. The other ones, I was identifying them as persuaders and flatterers. But this flatterer is self-proclaimed.
I consider myself a commercial grade persuader.
And interestingly, he follows exactly the same format as the prototypical flatterers that we've had on the page.
I see the world as this big irrational ball, and I use the hypnotist persuader skills to back up and try to deduce, what's really driving things.
From Georges through Aristotle, through all the flatterers that have followed them. He is the quintessential flatterer. So I thought it was very important to do a video on him, especially because at first listen, very much like Jordan Peterson and like Sam Harris and like Thomas Sowell, his doctrine or his presentation seems benign. It seems like the most, innocuous thing. Doesn't seem like there's any reason to be worried about it.
It looks like you did this for innocent reasons, but I know your real thought.
But if you dig down into the details,
from the persuasion filter,
here we go.
Since facts and logic and policies and stuff don't matter, it comes down to the nature of the human being. Free will, in my view of the world, is nothing but an illusion.
There's a lot to worry about it, because if you accept it as a doctrine, you lose two very important things. One, your ability to respond to evil, and two, your ability to prove happiness, to pursue happiness. Now, you're thinking, how the hell is that possible? Well, let me go through it a little bit. Because first of all, what he's doing is he's closing the door, locking the hatch, and throwing away the key on everything virtuous, right? By use of persuasion, and particularly conflation within his persuasion. Now, how does he do this? He uses persuasion, mostly opinions that
he repeats them all the time. That's good persuasion.
Also,
no repetition. Repetition is persuasion.
Sometimes
he repeats over and over and over that end up amounting to a form of doctrine, his own toolkit, and his keys to success. Now, when he puts these things together, he uses them to, one, degrade the philosopher's toolkit, right? And two, to take you off of the philosopher's mission. Now, that's the general persuasion is taken in that direction. But he also uses a section of his persuasion, which is conflation, to manipulate you into accepting flattery as philosophy, or persuasion, as he calls it, as philosophy. Now, as I said, the consequences of that are that he destroys your ability to respond to evil, and he destroys your ability to pursue happiness. Now, let me go into a little bit of this because I'm sure that's a mouthful and you're like, what the hell? How is that possible? Let me explain to you how it's possible. First of all, what's this philosopher's toolkit that he's undermining or degrading? Okay. Reason. In order for a philosopher to do what is the most important thing in philosophy, which is make discoveries, a philosopher needs reason. A philosopher needs to be a lover of reason. A philosopher needs to be an expert in reason. A philosopher has to be well practiced in reason. Reason is the bread and butter of a philosopher.
Reason, if it ever had a role, it's certainly less now.
Also, metaphor is how you communicate the discoveries that you make, right? How they go from just being a discovery in your head to being something tangible, right? And then you have creative expressions, which would be like the arts, sciences, things like that, that you can actually transmit these ideas, right? So a philosopher's world is dealing with what we would call mental objects, ideas, right? Not tangible things, but mental objects that start out in the mind, have to be made into a way that they can be moved along, communicated, and then if you want to once they're communicable, you have to find a way to transmit them. Okay, and then you have the philosopher's mission that I'm saying that he's taking us off of. So the philosopher's mission is mainly to pursue the good, right? So the good is always something in the future, right? So every choice that you make can be for two reasons: for the sake of the thing or for the sake of the good. Now, flattery is always done for the sake of the thing. And philosophy, when done properly, is always done for the sake of the good. Right. So how is a philosopher supposed to pursue the good? One is the philosopher needs to have mastery. You need to have mastery of the arts, mastery of the science. You have to be a master because it's excellence. It's your excellence that's going to be able to convey your ideas the best and to inspire. People are inspired by excellence. They're not inspired by mediocrity, okay? And finally, Sophia, which we spoke of before, wisdom and understanding. This is the goal of the philosopher, is to gain wisdom and to gain understanding. Now, how does Scott Adams undermine these two things? This toolkit that contains reason, metaphor, and creative expressions, right? And the mission of pursuing the good, pursuing mastery, and pursuing understanding, right? Well, he uses what I was mentioning before, these opinions.
He repeats them all the time. That's good persuasion.
Also, no repetition. Repetition is persuasive.
That he's constantly repeating that eventually take the form of a doctrine because he repeats them so often.
You are irrational creatures fundamentally. We are irrational 90% of the time.
The 90% of the time, we're completely irrational.
Right? And then you have his keys to success. So those two things he uses and contrasts with the toolkit of the philosopher and the philosopher's mission statement. And he, by his cynical take,
Principles are just sort of weak.
on many of the things within the philosopher toolkit, and also conflating certain certain concepts in order to undermine them is what's happening. So, for example, we're talking about the toolkit having reason, metaphor, and creative expression. So, when it comes to reason, he attacks that directly. So he starts by talking about how mind reading is problematic.
I always caution people to avoid mind reading. One of the most common things people will do is imagine that they know what some stranger is thinking. But there's so many times that you couldn't possibly know what this stranger is thinking. They know their inner thoughts. Oh, sure, it looks like you did this for innocent reasons, but I know your real thought is for power and money, and you've got something to gain.
And when he talks about mind reading, he uses something very clever, where he says that he talks about couples, right? And about how you could be in a great mood, and then your partner could look at you and be like, "Why are you being mad?" or "Why are you in a bad mood?" And you thought you were in a good mood.
And as evidence that you're not good at mind reading, as evidence that we're bad at reading people's thoughts, I give you every relationship you've ever been in. I give you every relationship you've ever been in. There's probably somebody sitting right next to you who in the last 24 hours assumed you were mad when you weren't. We're really bad at reading people's thoughts. Assumed that you were hungry when you weren't, assumed that you were, happy when you weren't. The people who know you best can't even tell if you're in a good mood or a bad mood sometimes.
I think the fair thing to say is you can't tell. If you can't tell, that should be your conclusion. You can't tell.
And it's so hard for us to be able to tell what is the mood of our partner. Now, that's an interesting thing. But determining the motive or determining what someone is about to do is very different than determining how somebody is feeling, right? So when he says, you can't mind read, so you can't guess what somebody is up to. That's basically what he's saying. You cannot project what somebody is up to.
That should be your conclusion. You can't tell.
But this isn't the case, because in nature, especially if you have reason, one of the things that you have to be able to do is look at if you look at how actions are organized, you should be able to tell what is the principle governing them, right? But he's saying no. He's saying that he says that, mind reading is something that we cannot do, right? So if you're saying that mind reading is something that you cannot do, then when somebody's up to no good,
it looks like you did this for innocent reasons, but I know your real thought. You can't tell.
They can always say, "Oh, you can't read my mind." But there's a lot of ways that you can tell when somebody's up to no good, right? Talk to people in jail and ask them if this is something that's legitimate, right? Their survival is based on being able to determine what someone's intentions are for them, especially if someone has a bad intention for you, right? You're not helpless to being able to act on it or defend yourself or, prepare yourself to defend yourself. What else does he go with? He talks about how he degrades the idea of our, being able to assimilate wholes or, discovering unities that exist, principles that are governing processes. And he talks about how people are just seeking patterns, right? We do much more than seek patterns, right? A pattern is that's a very low level of understanding of just a pattern, right? But in reality, every multiplicity, whether it's a multiplicity of actions, whether it's a multiplicity in the sense of a variety, is governed or generated by a unity. So our ability to discover what that unity is that is generating the multiplicity that we see, that is what we're doing. We're not seeking the patterns, right? Patterns is a very clumsy concept. Again, on reason, he talks about slippery slopes not existing.
And I try to point out that the slippery slope is not a thing. It doesn't exist.
Now, what he's talking about with slippery slopes not existing, he sounds more related to statistical forecasting, right? It's hard to project, out into the future based on statistics.
I've done lots of financial projections for a living. You can't do 3 years out with any kind of accuracy.
Right? But statistics are not principles, right? So like, for example, if you have a function, right? Because a statistical forecast looks like a function, right? It has a certain behavior of how it's moving. If you understand the concept of a function, then you actually can project it out into the future, or at least you can project it in a limited range out into the future, right? Or across the domain. But he makes it sound, by comparing statistical forecasting, which is not necessarily a reliable means to understanding the unity behind the process. He talks about slippery slopes not existing because statistical forecasting is fallible, very fallible. The next thing he says is that people don't use reason.
Reason, if it ever had a role, it's certainly less now.
One of the things you learn as a hypnotist is that the common view of the world is exactly upside down.
The hypnotist's view of the world is opposite.
So the normal view of the world is that we're rational creatures.
We use reason, we look at facts.
90% of the time.
Hypnotists reverse that. You are irrational creatures fundamentally.
The hypnotist turns that around
The hypnotist reverses that completely.
and says we are irrational 90% of the time.
The hypnotist says that 90% of the time we're completely irrational.
That is, that in order to be a hypnotist, you have to accept that people are irrational creatures.
And don't know it because we're rationalizing after the fact.
We are an irrational species who rationalizes after the fact.
But until you understand that we're irrational, you can't even be a hypnotist because nothing would make sense.
Because people are not really that rational.
And he repeats that very often.
He repeats them all the time. That's good persuasion.
Also,
No, repetition. Repetition is persuasive.
sometimes
That people do not use reason. Reason's not a thing. That it may be a thing, but it's not very useful because most people really just go on their emotions.
10% of the time we're rational.
And only 10% in like little ridiculous things
But that's only when there's no emotional content.
like balancing your checkbook or
Balancing your checkbook,
You're balancing a checkbook or something.
searching for the best price online.
finding a route to work.
That's rational.
The little stuff you're rational about,
No emotional content.
but not the big stuff that you care about.
People don't make decisions based on reason. They make decisions based on emotions. Now, you repeating that and repeating that and repeating that and repeating that.
He repeats them all the time. That's good persuasion.
No, repetition. Repetition is persuasive.
sometimes
Eventually, people are going to think, well, if everybody else is just making their decisions based on emotions, then what's the point of me making putting the effort in to develop my reasoning skills? Because I'm not really going to be using them in any way, right? He makes it seem as though like you can cut out the fat, which would be reasoning, because you're not going to need that. All you're going to need to do is be able to persuade someone of something. He comes at metaphors with this little sneaky sleight of hand, using the word analogy,
Nothing hinges on this.
No, because all analogies are approximations by design. So you're not talking about the same topic. Anyway, we could talk about analogies some more.
Sure.
I agree that analogies are excellent for explaining a concept for the first time. So if you say a zebra, if you've never heard of a zebra, it's like a horse, but imagine it has some stripes on it. So I don't, there are lots of cases where that's good.
That gets me a long way to a zebra. Yeah.
Right. But it doesn't make a zebra a horse, right? And never can, right?
Right? So he talks about how analogies are problematic, right? Now, metaphors are the only way that you can communicate a mental object or a new idea that is in one mind needed to communicate it to another. Metaphor is the only way to do it. But he talks about analogies. So basically, a zebra is kind of like a horse, but has stripes. But that this is not reliable. So he's basically saying that a metaphor is how we associate a noun with an object, which is not what a metaphor is used for, right? But by using the word analogy that most people would associate with metaphor, he kind of kills the idea of metaphor, which is a crucial way to communicate new ideas. So he's coming at all the different ways that we perfect and cultivate our mental processes. So with those two comes a reason, and it comes a metaphor. Now, in terms of the actor's mission, I'm not the actor's mission. In terms of the philosopher's mission, the ultimate mission of the philosopher is the good, right? A philosopher is made to pursue the good. Now, what is he teaching, right? After he has basically talked down the philosopher's toolkit.
Reason, if it ever had a role, it's certainly less now.
Right? Talked down reasoning with all the things that you might do with reasoning, right? Determining a mode of action, right? He says he eliminates that by saying that mind reading is that people cannot mind read. Although there are specifics that are unavailable to you in someone's mind. Their actions can tell you certain things, and he's basically killing your ability to identify the ordering of actions as representing a principle in action, which is not the same as saying is your girlfriend in a bad mood, okay? But if she picks up a stick, right, and bangs it on the table in front of you, then maybe she wants to hit you with it, right? Okay. So once he's done that, then he starts to hit you with, some of his keys to success, right? Which are, things like learning to be shameless.
I was like everybody else with a normal sense of embarrassment, but it's actually a learned skill. You can actually, train it out of yourself.
If I'm embarrassed by something, I do that thing.
But I have an unnatural ability to deal with shame. It's a practiced skill.
Now, is that how you pursue the good? By being shameless? I don't know about that one. He's talking about how fighting dirty is the best way.
Fighting dirty works better.
These are all things that are straight out of the Nicomachean Ethics, which is Aristotle's book on virtue, right? It's called he has a section called the Aristocratic Proud Man, right? So this is all from the proud man. Fighting dirty is best. Fear is, fighting dirty works best.
If you were to rank the different types of persuasion, Fear is always the top because, if you don't take care of your fear, you can't really do anything else.
Your biggest motivators are fear.
The best persuasion is fear.
Fear, which is your ultimate persuasion. And that
Fear is the best tool, right? And he talks about replacing goals with systems. Now, he doesn't say that make sure that your goals are accompanied by a system. He says abandon goals altogether. Now, how are you going to pursue the good without a goal?
So let's say you want to be the best javelin thrower and win the Olympic gold medal in that. Well, that's great if it works. But what about the thousands of people who tried that and it didn't work? When they're done, they're prepared for nothing else. All right, now that's an extreme example. But as opposed to goals, what I recommend people look at is a system.
And what system are you going to create if you don't have a goal? It would seem that the only system that you wouldn't be creating a system, you'd be inheriting someone else's system. Now, that system, whatever system it would be that you'd be inheriting, is based on a goal. There's no such thing as a system that's not based on a goal, because the system is to achieve an objective, but the goal is the objective. So if you take away the objective, how can you have a system? So to me, that seems like you're taking away the main, your agency, because the goal is the purpose for you having a system. So, like I say, he has a system, and if he tells you to get rid of your goal, then you can take on his system. Mastery. Mastery is one of the other missions, is part of the mission of the philosopher, right? Your mastery of the arts and sciences. Mastery, right, is how you're going to inspire others, right? By excellence. What does he say about mastery? He talks about talent stacking, which is very much like Georgius of Leontini in Plato's Dialogue of Georgius, right? When Socrates asks Georgius what he can do better than anyone, he can't do anything better than anyone. What he can do is persuade.
People who have persuasion talent tend to be fluid across fields in a way that other people are not.
So he doesn't know how to do any of the things, but he knows how to pretend to be all of the different things better than the people that really are doing it can pretend to be those things. So he's talking about how you need a talent stack.
Second thing is what I call the talent stack.
The skill stack.
In my case, I'm not a great artist. Because I have a combination of talents. I'm pretty good at drawing and I'm pretty good at writing and I'm a little bit funny.
But if you're really good at one thing and you know public speaking, you're probably going to be the boss of those people who are only good at one thing.
Right? Don't be the best at anything. That's literally what he says. Don't be the best at anything because it's hard. This is another thing with the flatterers. It's always, if something is hard, don't do it, right? Where the philosopher is like, dedicate yourself to making sure that you can do it, right? Aim high, all this stuff, right? The whole thing with choosing the lesser of two evils, because it's hard to hit the exact mean, you're better to choose the lesser of two evils, right? And both of them are evil. So he's saying to choose evil because doing the right thing is hard. Choose a lesser evil because doing good is hard. So he's saying have a talent stack. Be mediocre in everything. And then you can persuade people, right? A jack of all trades and a master of none. So he's eliminating the idea of mastery. One of the wildest things that he had to say was avoid artistic integrity at all costs.
I am not on the side of the artists who have, there's this thing called artistic integrity I've heard of. I try to avoid it at all costs.
Right? Talks about how the value of your art is that if people have paid for it.
So when somebody says, is somebody's art good, I usually say, is anybody buying it? If they're buying it, it's good. If they buy it twice, it's really good. And if they don't buy it, I don't care how much art went into it. Nobody wants it.
Right? So that's crazy, right? The motivation of a poet, the motivation of a scientist, the motivation of a musician or a composer, right, cannot be monetary. You're never going to be able to make the best work by that. Even take a simple things. Take rap music. Vanilla Ice is the highest selling rapper of all time. Now, is he better than like Big Daddy Kane or friggin' Rakim or friggin' Nas or even Jay-Z or Tupac? That's the most evil, vilest thing that you can do to the arts or to art culture in general, is to put that kind of a stamp on it. That's basically what killed hip hop, is that guys that were lacking in skills were like, but I sell more records, right? And then look at what we have now, because the sales took over, and then all the really skilled people are no longer in the game anymore. So that was one of the ones where I was like, wow. The next thing, again, with the not having, it fits in with not having a goal, right? Is where he talks about pacing and leading, where it's like another situation where there's no goal involved.
And then also use what I call pacing and leading. So first you match them.
Emotionally, you're matching them. So you're matching them in some way
Listening to their point of view, repeating it back.
that they recognize as, hey, you're one of me.
And once you're matched, you can start leading. And then the other person will follow you because you're sort of one brain.
And some part of you, some part of your brain, you just have an automatic trust for somebody who's doing whatever you're doing at the same time.
The way he describes pacing and leading is that, you know, he gives full credence to both sides. He says that they're always, both sides of an issue are always going to both be wanting the right thing. They just have different ways of looking at it, and all you need to do is get in the middle of them. It's kind of like that, you know, Aristotelian lesser of two evils concept.
So you would need to pace both sides.
But you get in the middle of them, and you get each side to believe that you're on their side, right? And then once you've convinced them both that they're on your side, then you can move them towards something. Doesn't necessarily say what you're going to move them to, right? Because that would require reason. That would require, you know, reason to get you discovery. That would require creative expression. That would require pursuing the good. That would require goals, right? Positive goals. That would require mastery of understanding, such that you would have a proper place to lead them. But as you can see here, he doesn't have to say it, but a flatterer is always dealing with popular opinion. It's not about principles.
Principles are just sort of weak.
It's not about the truth, doing the right thing. It's about doing what's popular. So you take it to, it's democratic in the worst way, right? Where in reality, one person who knows the truth should carry the day, even if the majority are against that. So this idea of pacing and leading is an interesting one. So one of the things that he does to the philosophers is he makes an attempt to actually pace the philosophers. Now, this pacing thing is when you act like you're the same as the people, right? In order to get them to buy into you, so that they trust you, right? So if they trust you, then they'll be more likely to follow you, even if they disagree a little bit with you. Now, the strange thing is, you know, he's just destroyed the philosopher's toolkit, right?
Reason if it ever had a role. It's certainly less now.
Whereas principles are just sort of weak. No, because all analogies are approximations by design. So you're not talking about the same topic. There's this thing called artistic integrity I've heard of. I I try to avoid it at all costs.
By, you know, by talking, by repeating a certain doctrine that kind of has a cynical view of things like reason, metaphor, creative expression, right? And the goals of the philosopher, chasing the good, chasing mastery, chasing understanding. He has a very cynical view of all of these things. But so that you will feel that he's not just a total Philistine, right? He says that he promotes the fruits that actually come from living your life in a way that you are emphasizing these things, right? If you emphasize reason, right, discovery, you know, scientific achievement, arts and science achievement, right, artistic mastery, right? If you do all these things, then you're going to be in a place where you're going to be able to move society forward, right? Where you're going to be able to make discoveries that enhance society or push it towards progress, right? But he wants to big up the fruits of that type of an action while degrading those things, right? So nobody reasons. There's here and there that we reason. We're not promoting that, but especially when he talks about science, right?
And then through the years, we get better at predicting and, building homes that don't blow away in hurricanes and stuff. So the most likely thing that would happen in 80 years is that the number of people who are dying from weather would drop to zero.
He's saying that we always will eventually find the answer, right? So it's like, without doing any of the things that the philosopher does, right? We're just going to stumble onto progress, and it's an automatic thing by osmosis. I don't know how he imagines that these things happen, other than people committing to mastering the concepts and mastering their creative powers and their reasoning powers and their scientific powers, right? And their willingness to pursue the good, right? Without these things, how is it that you're going to get these fruits, right, of progress? So that's how he paces, as though he is on the side of the philosopher, by saying that,
yeah, they don't buy into what I call the Adams law of slow-moving disasters, which is if you can see a disaster coming and everybody can see it, and you've got lots of time to work on it, let's say years, we're really good at fixing stuff we see coming.
he believes that that human beings are always going to prosper, right? That you give them time, they will eventually figure everything out. But they're not going to just figure everything out if they don't believe in reason, if they don't believe in, in metaphor, if they don't have a way to communicate ideas to other people, right? And if they don't have a way to inspire and to transmit these ideas, then none of that stuff happens. If you actually left to our own devices, history doesn't actually say that we end up in progress. What it actually says is that we end up in dark ages, societal collapse, wars, long wars. That's generally what happens when the philosopher's instinct becomes rare in society, or becomes undermined, or becomes lost. Not that we just stumble towards greatness. Now, along this same line of pacing, he eventually moves on to conflating philosophy with persuasion in order to just teach straight up persuasion and flattery. So he says things like,
the pacing and leading, genius. It's like the highest level. It's probably never been done. That's like Jesus level persuasion. Yeah, I would say that on the persuasion level, A+ right across the board for Dr. King.
Martin Luther King was the greatest persuader of all. Now, he's not saying that the truth should be the best persuasion, right? So he may be getting a little catch in there, is that the truth should be the best persuasion, right? But he talks about it in a very technical way, where it's almost like the 48 laws of faking, you know?
Now, it's definitely a case of acting until it's real.
Appearances versus reality. It's almost like the way that an actor does a presentation.
He would just play a role. He would just say, all right, if I were going to play the role of somebody who was confident and talking to an adult in power, what would that look like? And I would watch him do it, and I'd say, I could do that. I can't do it naturally because I don't have those skills, but I can play the part of a guy who can do it.
But actually but if he really knew about acting, actors don't actually do that. They're not just doing the outward shows of the presentation. They're actually trying to get some of the internal stuff to actually match the motivations. That's what actors are always doing. They're what's my motivation? Right? So what he's just trying to do is just take somebody that's telling the truth and then copy them, even when you're not telling the truth necessarily, right? So, all the things that he's describing, whether it's like breathing in certain ways or, staying calm or any of these different things, when somebody really does have a mastery of something, then they are going to be calm, because what are they worried about? There's no reason to be worried. But then if you're just pretending, so you're just going to be calm so that people will think that you have a mastery, right? It's like he's trying to gain the authority, right, without the power that gives that authority is generated from.
I can't do it naturally because I don't have those skills, but I can play the part of a guy who can do it.
Right? He's taking a shortcut to the authority by pretending to be the real thing, right? So, for example, he's talking about Martin Luther King being a persuader.
I mean, that's pacing. He could not have been nearly as successful if he was not matching the people he was trying to persuade. So the pacing and leading, genius. It's like the highest level. It's probably never been done. That's like Jesus level persuasion.
So he's saying that Martin Luther King, when he was trying to convince society of his ideas, that he was using pacing. Now, he wasn't using pacing. He was using the truth and universal law, right? He wasn't saying, I'm like you, when he was going to the racist people in the South at the time, right? He wasn't saying like, I'm like you, racist person, you should listen to me because I'm like you. That wasn't what he was doing at all. He was appealing to them because they are human beings, right? And universal law is universal law. It's unbreakable. So he was more promoting the law, the universal law. That's what he was saying. And they were resonating with the universal law. But he wasn't making himself like them. He wasn't saying, well, I can't stand you guys either. You know what I mean? Or he wasn't doing anything like that. So it's like he wants to claim, philosophers into the camp of flatterers or persuaders, which they don't belong in the same camp, right? Yeah, it's very much like 48 Laws of Faking. I call it 48 Laws of Faking. Some people call it 48 Laws of Power. But 48 Laws of Power is all about trying to appear as though you are powerful, or trying to appear as though you should be the leader. But the way that they're doing that is by copying the appearance of real people who actually did have the power, did have the understanding, did have the strength, right? So, for example, if you know jiu-jitsu or something like that, and you're dealing with a bunch of people that don't know jiu-jitsu, you're not going to be intimidated by them. So you're going to have a posture that's that's not anxious, right? But you could also just pretend to act like you're calm, right? So to make people think that you're strong, right? If you don't react, you can make people think that you're something. But if they call your bluff, you're screwed, right? So that's what the problem is that it's all about appearing to be in a certain way as opposed to actually being that thing, right? It's like bad acting and, being bad actors. Pun intended, because a real actor, like I'm saying, is understands the motivation, right? But Martin Luther King, Socrates, these people are not flatterers. These people are not persuaders. They're not using persuasion. What they're using is reason. And even though reason and persuasion or flattery can sound the same, but they're not the same, right? It's like, seeking patterns and discovering unities look the same, but they're not the same. Like if you take something like derivatives, right? If you solve a derivative by geometric means, you're going by the unities, right? But after someone else has already discovered that, and you can go through all the different derivatives, you can see the patterns. So in school, we're taught the patterns. We're not necessarily taught the unities that were discovered, right? So the pattern thing is something that comes after the fact, right? When you're trying to find a shortcut, when you don't really want to know what the whole thing is. But they're very different. So, lazy humans seek patterns. But humans, when we're at our best, when we're firing at all cylinders, we're trying to assimilate wholes and discover unities that exist beyond the variation and change that it comes to our senses, that reaches our senses. So if you allow the philosopher's toolkit to be degraded, if you allow yourself to be taken off of the philosopher's mission, which is to pursue the good, pursue mastery, and pursue understanding, if you allow that to happen, and you accept these keys to success that he lays out, and these ideas that he keeps repeating, right? Like that mind reading is impossible, right? That seeking patterns is what human beings do, as opposed to discovering unities or assimilating wholes. That slippery slopes are not a thing just because statistical forecasting fails, or that people don't use reason, so why should you bother using reason? If you accept all that, then you end up in a position very much like in Jordan Peterson's situation in the last video that I did, where if you accept that your mind is that all conceptual schemes fail, you end up in a situation where you are helpless. All of these flatterers, the thing that they all have in common is that they have a way of attacking your agency, right? They don't directly do that because that would look bad, but that's what the consequences of all of these characters is, that they're eliminating your ability to respond. How do you respond to evil if you accept all of this, right? If you accept that the best way to fight is to fight dirty, and that fear is the best tool to use, and that you should learn to be shameless, and that you should replace goals with systems, when those are two things that are inseparable. How do you separate a system from a goal? A system is to accomplish a goal. And I don't want to hear that, well, that's got to be what he meant. It's not what he meant, because that's not what he said. If he wanted to say that, he wouldn't say goals are meaningless, right? He would have said that make sure that your goals have an efficient system or a legitimate system to go with them. That's not what he said. And if you accept, the attack on mastery, right? If you give up trying to master something because it's hard to be in the top 1%, right? And you want to get a set of skills, right? To a stack of useful skills. Nobody is saying that you shouldn't try to do as many things well as you can, but the main thing is that you have to master something, right? That's as a society, our goal as a society has to be mastery of something. We can't have a bunch of jacks of all trades, right? Because then nobody's going to be excellent at anything. Do you want to listen to music in a world where nobody has mastered it, where everybody's just okay at it, right? That means that's the end of like music that actually touches you, or writers that everybody's just okay at it, right? Theater, plays. Imagine if Shakespeare was just okay, and all the other poets that were before, none of them mastered the art, right? Imagine that. So if you accept all that, right, and you accept that, that you can get it, that you can do all that and still get all the fruits that they bring, and you just accept the fact that those fruits just come, like I'm saying, by osmosis or some deterministic way, right? So you're stumbling deterministically into progress and everything will always be okay, then we're going to be doomed. Because that's not how it works. We have to be racking our brains. We have to be, actively mastering those different skills, our reasoning skills, our communicating skills, our level of arts and science mastery. All these things have to be, constantly elevated if we're going to survive. Because when we naturally go through things, like I'm saying, when you go on autopilot, you're usually autopiloting into a societal collapse. So if you accept all this, then you end up in a situation where you cannot respond to evil. Now, by evil, what do I mean? So what are the evils that we can experience? You can experience, wars, conquering forces, plagues, tyrannical governments, dark ages, societal collapses, as I said before, natural disasters, Evil generally is anything that's going to restrict the good or restrict your ability to pursue the good. Now, that's always going to take creativity, right? And creativity is fostered by things that are in the Philosopher's Toolkit and in their mission statement, as well as things like a love of humanity, right? The desire, the agape, the reason to do all this, right? So that's where we end up. If we accept all this, we have a problem responding to evil. But then also, we lose the desire and the ability and the focus to be able to pursue happiness. Now, by happiness, I don't mean the hedonistic, Hollywood, happy ending, he who dies with the most toys wins type of happiness. I'm talking about happiness in the sense of living your life in a way that the world is better for you having lived. That is the real happiness. It's that being a part of the continuum of humanity, right? Doing your part to move the ball forward, and knowing that when you die, you can die happy, knowing that what comes after you will have benefited from your life. That's what we are, when we're being righteous, why we're living, right? That's every choice, righteous choice that you're making is for that. That's the good that you're pursuing, right? So you wanna be able to live a necessary life, right? But if you're pursuing what he's describing, you're gonna want that Hollywood happy ending, right? Because look at what you're doing. We're fighting dirty, all these different things. How is any of that gonna make it so that you're leaving a better world, right? So it's like, persuasion is always going to be evil.
So certainly he's using these techniques, which if they were in the hand of a bad character, would be seriously bad. Like as bad as anything could be.
Even, some people would say, if a righteous person's using it, then it'll be okay. But first of all, most people are not. They're contradicting, so it'll be hard to be a righteous person and to use it. And the other thing is, a righteous person doesn't need to use persuasion because they can just use the truth, right? Persuasion is something that you use when you need to manipulate. For example, if the non-doctor is on the stage with the doctor, and this is from Socrates' Georges, right? And the audience is ignorant, then that's where you're going to need persuasion, right? Because you want to win the ignorant people over, right? When the doctor has a medicine that he wants to prescribe to you, he does not persuade you into taking the medicine. He tells you the truth, right? And that's how he gets you to take it. I'm not talking, our current situation aside, generally when you're dealing with a doctor, when you go to the doctor for a checkup and he's saying that you have a tumor that he needs to cut out, he doesn't persuade you to cut it out. He explains to you what the circumstances are, and then that sells itself, right? Persuasion is only required when you're trying to get over on someone, and that's a fact. Without the ability to respond to evil, and without the desire to pursue happiness, real happiness, not Hollywood happiness, happiness as in living a necessary life, the only thing you're left with is hedonism, right? Now, if you are a hedonist that has no poetry in your life, no poetic soul, no beautiful soul, no virtue, right? Then you can be super easily manipulated, because the only things that you're governing yourself by, again, is the moment, right? You're not governing yourself by the hope of the future, which is the only strength that you can have against your hedonistic tendencies, your animalistic hedonistic tendencies. And the oligarchs, the top dogs, the bankers, they control all of your hedonistic tendencies. They control sex, they control drugs, they control food, especially the sweets, right? All of those different things that can make you, they control fear, they control pain, they control fighting dirty, all those different things, they control those things. So if you want to be something transcendent, then you have to be more than a hedonist. You can say that you can kill the philosopher's toolkit and the mission statement, but you wouldn't be telling the truth. You'd have to explain how you can do that. And he hasn't explained how he can do that, right? If you end up in a situation where all you're left with is your hedonism, then you are in a situation where you can be manipulated basically like a Pavlovian dog. You end up in a situation where a behaviorist can control you by punishing you, right? Torturing you, right? And Even if you love dogs, you don't want to actually become one mentally, because the dog that you love, it requires you to be its leader, okay? It wants you to lead the way. Now, if you're brought down to its level, then both of you will die. So that's that. That's all I got to say. All right, thanks for sharing this time with me. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you've seen, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you can be alerted when I'm gonna make my next video. My next one, I'll let you in on a little secret. My next video is on Peter Schiff, the libertarian economist. I'm coming for him. Because he says a lot of stuff that's actually very flattery. Okay, so we're gonna come at his philosophy and what he's promoting, which isn't very good either. So, thanks for being here with me. I'm Big Folk. See you next time.
I've been down this road before, but now I got my shit together.